love that zippy sound. Hi, everybody. My name is Marilyn. I'm the CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs. I will be your host for a big bunch of the third edition of the annual Cosmic Conference. I'm joined today by Tala, as she liked to call herself, Centaur number one. Although I always tell her that I'm Centaur number one, but it's okay. She gets the honorary title. I'll be Centaur number zero. Why not?
Yeah, that works. That works.
We're here to welcome you to the third edition of our annual Cosmic Conference. This year, we are speaking all about the employee experience. And in order to better understand employee experience, we'll be exploring this topic through a variety of lenses: internal comms, employee engagement, flexible work, office design, organizational strategy, upskilling, retention, culture, purpose, anything that touches employee experience, you name it, we will be talking about it over the next 3 weeks. Yes, folks, our conference runs from September 21st to 28th to October 21st. And every day we're going to have 1 or 2 lives with incredible experts, academics, managers from all over the world sharing their experience around designing incredible employee experiences. All of this information is available on our conference website, which we will link for you in the comments. And before we begin, as always, please do show us some love. Give this video a like. If you think that someone you know is going to enjoy watching this, please tag them or send them the link. And of course, share your thoughts as we go. You don't just have to ask questions. You can also make comments, share ideas. We'd love to hear them. All right, so with that, let me introduce today's session. Our guest for this session was Imad Lahad. Actually, this is, of course, a rebroadcasting of the session that we had with Imad during our opening event, in-person event last week in Dubai. But worry not, Tala and I will also be doing the director's cut, which means we will not only be showing you some excerpts from our conversation with Imad last week, but hopefully adding a bit of color and some extra details, things we forgot to say last week that we'd love to add. Let me quickly introduce Imad. Imad is the managing director of APCO Worldwide's Dubai office. He's the head of APCO's seminal AI Comms Lab. He is also the co-lead of APCO's global digital practice. He's an innovator by nature, and he's taken the company in bold new directions since joining in 2013. Starting his APCO journey as director of digital strategy, Imad quickly became co-lead of the firm's global digital practice soon after establishing the AI Comms Lab. In his years with APCO, he's forged an international reputation as an out-of-the-box disruptor, a professional hardwired to harness experimental and emerging technologies and tools to hone elevated communications and storytelling strategies above and beyond expectations. And stick around because his intervention is definitely above and beyond. Today's topic is all about rethinking the office. The office is a big part of the employee experience, even if everybody's trying to kill it these days. The office is not dead and will not die. As we heard yesterday with John Priest, it's all about rethinking and being intentional about how the office fits into our toolbox and enables the activities that are essential and that need to take place inside of it. Imad was, one of the first people to believe in us and bring us on board to help them redesign APCO's Dubai offices, and we are going to be exploring together some of the work that we did and some of the really interesting insights that we discovered that, sometimes go even opposite the global trends. So stick around to get a bit of a flavor of what is very specific to the region here. Hala, anything to add before we kick things off?
No, I mean, that was quite the introduction. I'll let you keep going.
Thanks. As you can tell, as a reformed architect, these office discussions are some of my favorites. I feel like all of my 8 years of suffering and being an architecture student have finally come to full fruition, and I can talk for days about this. So very, very exciting topic for us. So just before we let Imad do the talking, a little bit of reintroducing the work that we did together as part of this mission. So when we were brought on board, the brief was, pre-pandemic, APCO Dubai thought that they would move to bigger offices. Then the pandemic happened. All of the entire wave of flexible working happened. And as they, are very well positioned to understand the future trends, considering that they're a comms company and a consulting company. They knew that they had to rethink flexible work for their organization. And so they decided to stay in the offices where they were, but to undergo a complete refurbishment. They wanted to rethink the way that they work as part of a Workplace for the Future initiative. And they wanted to address not only the deficiencies of the past, but also the requirements of the future in providing a more flexible workplace. And that's why they brought us on board. Just a little bit of history about the office. I hope you guys can understand architectural plans, but if you can't, I will explain them to you really quickly. So the original APCO offices were over here. You can see a little L shape. They were quite traditional in the sense that, you have a very typical entry reception. A lot of the big spaces are allocated to very formal, boardroom type areas, but also to the offices of their leaders, whereas all the employees are then kind of, call it, stuck on the inside without real access to natural light. And then as the team grew and the second brand, Dot Pomelo, was created under the umbrella of APCO, the office kind of organically grew into the second wing, but without the ability to really rethink how staff engage and collaborate and work together. And this was a perfect moment to put all of that into question. And so at the end of today's session, we'll show you what the outcome looked like after our work together. But of course, our work was not to redesign the office. Rather, it was to write a brief for the architect. And I think this is why this is a universally interesting case study and why we wanted to bring it to you guys, because the way that we approach office design, despite my reformed architect self, is to really ensure that when we're thinking about the office, we're thinking about it as one of many channels that are leveraged in the course of our work today. So for knowledge workers today, we know that we work not only across digital channels, but also across physical channels. As we've seen with John Priest yesterday, liberated work means those physical channels don't have to just be the office. They could be a home office, a co-working space, a cafe, or what have you. And as we are rethinking flexible work and work of the future, we have to really think about how we create an omnichannel experience, and the office is only one of those things. But when it comes to rethinking the office, this is something we quickly touched upon with John Priest yesterday conceptually, but we've developed this kind of framework, to say, well, a tool is only as good as the activities that it supports. So if we think of the office as a tool, what are the activities that we used to perform in the office, let's say in 2019, that we now want to question, that we want to say, well, are these really still important? Are we still really needing the office in order to have these activities take place? And so everything from individual work all the way to creating collective memory, to culture, to collaboration, to coaching, and so on. We call this the 9Cs framework. And essentially, we break this down into 9 categories. And for every organization, like here we have some colors, red, green, etc. But those differ from one organization to the next, right? What you would have thought, looking at this, and so did we in the beginning, is like, but of course, nobody wants to go to the office to do their individual work. Stick around, because you'll be surprised to find out that isn't exactly true for everybody. And so rather than make assumptions about which ones are needed and which ones aren't, I think this case study is really a very beautiful example to really dig into the number and into the storytelling and make sure that you know what people want before you make assumptions, or even before you use global data in order to make decisions. So that was a bit of an introduction there. Tala, you're going to walk us through perhaps a little bit of the work that we did, and then we'll let Imad do the talking.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that as with all projects we take on, we really love human-centered design. So we took a minute to first diverge. We did a discovery phase. We tried to really speak to all the different employees, look at some of the global data, look for some case studies, and just unearth whatever we could about the best way to rethink the design of an office. We then took that and put it in practice and collaborated actually with the APCO teams to try and understand, all right, well, what are the priorities? What are the needs of leaders? What are the needs of employees? And that was the phase where we really dove into sort of what the foundations of our design would look like. We then documented it, and like Marilyn said, put together that design brief. Marilyn's actually the only one who's an architect, so we didn't put the layouts together per se specifically, but we worked with the team to understand what the office could look like in terms of their needs. This all culminated in really what is the next phase, which is managing that change. And Imad touches on that a little bit in the videos that you'll be seeing. But like you can see here, we really did our diligence in terms of the discovery. The rethink was about coming together and trying to make sense of that data. Then we went back out and put together what the design brief could look like, and then how the teams would roll it out. So diverging, converging, and then diverging again to make sure we're always using that human-centric design for a project that's really all about the people and what their needs were and how they come together to create value.
And on this note, we have to also thank the two experts that worked with us, Suzanne and Houri, who is a real architect or remained an architect, unlike me, who failed at staying one, who actually helped us put together that final plan, as well as Dr. Augustine Chavez, who helped us with some of the thinking and the measurement in this process. So shout out to our two experts. We were very grateful to have them on the team. And with that, actually, Tala, great introduction. We do kick off the conversation with Imad, asking him about, as a leader, his approach to people centricity. The data, I think, says that about 66% of executives are designing their new work policies without input from their teams or organization. And we were very, very happy to have a leader who is in the remaining 34%. So let's hear it from Imad.
So, Imad, talk to us about that. Talk to us about the people centricity aspect of why you wanted to bring us on board to look at that information.
Part of the context, we are 120 plus, team members. So it's not a small office. And the doctor, as Marine was saying, like getting out of COVID, everything we saw in our offices, in the States or Europe, the discussions in the company were like downsizing the office, making it smaller. We don't need that much space, and so on and so forth. Now, pre-COVID, that space was getting a bit crowded for us, and we were planning even growing that space. But we took a step back, and we looked at it from what do we want to achieve out of our new way of working, and reverse engineer that to the office and see how this place, we make it a place where people are happy to come if they want to, and much more, I wouldn't say collaborative, it's much more, social. It's much more comfortable. You come and you feel that there's a nice thing happening. I have a nice spot I can work on. It's much more fluid than it was before, and that's the main thing. We like to host clients as well at our office, so we wanted that space as well to be a place where clients can come, and it's a nice place to be in. And we mixed it between having very social places all the way to more of, I would say, formal setup, but everything in between. But the most important part is listening to our team members. We have 27 plus nationalities in the office. They come from different backgrounds, different ways of living back home or in their houses. Family structure, multi-generation families living in one place versus singles living in Dubai Marina or living somewhere else. Totally different way of looking at space and at working spaces and living spaces. So we wanted to look at data, but at the same time look at our folks and see what the things that they like and things that would fit more in our working environment, so that we can as well, our work policies, working from home, how to apply it, all of that the product has to meet the expectation.
Imad touched on something that really hits home for me, which is, and we'll talk more about it, these multi-generational families. I think it's so interesting. Dubai is such a unique place in that it's a really expat-based society. So you have such a diverse talent pool, and you don't know what people go home to. You don't know what that homes look like. But when I was working in PR, actually, I lived with my family too. And it was my grandmother who was 90 and my younger brother who was 4 and everybody in between. And so working at home was nearly impossible, to find a space, let alone to be able to manage, who needs what space. So The next video is one where Imad talks a little bit about and you as well touch on it too, the differences between what the global data says and then how this market is really different, and then the differences within this market alone and how we took that into account. So not sure if there's anything else you wanted to add to that, Marilyn, but I think we should dive in and give people a listen to what Imad said about that.
Yeah, so remember when I told you earlier that we use design thinking? That's what we did. We talked to 27 people in the team, including experts from outside of the organization. We sent a survey and we bullied everyone so that they could answer.
We did qualitative and quantitative. You select focus groups, surveys, one-on-ones.
Everything. We observed people, so we went and sat in the office and saw how they actually work. So, everybody kept saying, oh, APCO is like, the office is noisy. And then we went there and we're like, no, you're not, compared to another agency. And so we really dug deep in order to understand what are the needs of the employees. And we discovered a lot of things that are different versus the global data. You were talking a little bit about that multi-generational home example. I think you and I both love it. You want to give us a bit more?
Yes, we have lots of people that, like so many of our team members, although they're young, 20s, mid-20s, but they've been, especially Arabic-speaking team members, so many of them are born and raised in the UAE. They live still with their parents, or they have 3, 4, I would say 2 generations of family with their grandmothers or whatever in the same household. Or people coming from different parts of the world where they have as well their parents or their extended family with them in the same place. So for them, working from home was not very fun. And they see coming to the office as kind of breathing space and not the other way around. So all of these factors we took into consideration about how to look at this. But I think one of the major issues that you mentioned at the beginning is that our office is big. It's pretty much open. It has so much, I would say, daylight coming in. But all of that was hijacked by people like us. So we had all the nice offices everywhere on the side. And everyone was, the labor was all the way in the middle. And sitting there, okay, we had, nice rooms to chill out and so on and so forth. But that was the mantra. What we did is that we reversed that. Every single person in the new format has access to daylight. So we moved all the majority of the folks sitting in working areas all across the daylight. We had like an internal garden where it has as well daylight. We moved people there as well. So meeting rooms are more in the inside space. Our offices are more in the inside space. So every single one coming to the office has the opportunity of sitting and having daylight coming. These are small stuff, but it meant a lot for individuals, right? We're not just thrown away in a back room somewhere, especially the support services, because we host as well, finance for not only Dubai, for a big part of the region, Europe and Asia sits here. IT, the accounting folks, all of these are like kind of shared services. And we didn't want like those guys are just, sitting in the back room somewhere servicing different places. So these are the things we looked at when we were like planning the next working environment.
Yeah, and I think what I really learned from this experience is, we got a lot of great data globally. Groups like the Future Forum or Gallup, they're putting out amazing data every day about worker demands. But in fact, that data is very much Anglo-Saxon, and it's very much for a different kind of economy. So the example of multi-generational homes, that just, you couldn't get that from global data. The example here of youth, many of them grew up here, but also many young people come here as their first job to work for an agency. They did not want to stay at home, which is completely opposite to the behavior in other parts of the world. And I think taking the time to do that research and to hear those stories and to say, well, actually, by the way, we do still need individual desks. We're not going to get rid of those. Even though the vision in the beginning is like collaboration, but then you listen and you're like, actually, people want to come to the office just to do their job. So we're going to let them. And I think that was the really beautiful revelation of this project, is if you listen to your people, you'll design something for them.
Yeah, I really love this part of our work together. It was truly human-centric to have this approach and to be given the time actually to go and make these measurements. Even though we didn't take 6 months to do this, it was a few weeks, but the time and the leadership endorsement actually to go and really hunt for all of this information in order to make better decisions. We have a question here from the audience about what other findings we had that contradicted global data. I think we mentioned some of them. A couple of others, what we found at UPCO was actually that the more recent you were in the organization, the less likely you were to want flexible work, which sounds, intuitive because you're new, so you want to be connected to others and you want to learn. But if you look at the data coming from the US, I've seen so many LinkedIn posts this week about how like young people are refusing to come to the office and what they're missing out on. And I think that because Dubai is a place where people immigrate to work, it's just part of maybe embracing the full experience. There is no comfort zone at home for many of us, right? Because it's not like we're with our family. It's not like we're in our bedroom that we grew up in. There's no comfort zone anyways. So I think it also pushes everybody out of their house and into the community and the network around them. We mentioned a couple more, around youth wanting to be at the office, which again is not aligned with the rest of the world. Another great example is it so happens that because India is one of the greatest exporter of technology talent, a lot of the people here who work in IT and technology come from India, and therefore culturally are part of the multi-generational home example. Even though globally jobs like IT support is definitely not only something that you can do from home, but something that you could outsource completely. Like the organization per se doesn't have an incentive to have these people sitting in the office, but for them it was like, I really can't do my job if I'm at home. So listening to these stories and through the cultural and socioeconomical diversity of Dubai was really such a beautiful moment for us.
Marilyn, I have a question for you. When you were talking about the research, it's something you touched on in your keynote, actually, and that's drawing tools from doing customer experience research and using it for your employee experience. Maybe tell us, you touched on in the video about how we went to the offices and we observed people. That's like almost like mystery shopping or a day in the life. Which tool do you feel that we used shed like a really interesting insight on the project, and which one would you recommend for other leaders to begin with if they were doing a similar exercise?
Look, honestly, I think nothing ever beats a good interview.
Right.
I love quantitative data, but I always tell like you cannot understand what a survey tells you if you don't understand the stories behind it. It's all about human stories.
Yeah.
And that's why observing is also cool, because you get to have, like, I remember when we went to the UPCO offices, like we found that some of the younger talent had set up like this drawer with chocolates and like snacks. We learned a bit more about the rituals that they have together as a team. Like there was a lot of the stuff that, first of all, would never come up in a survey.
Right.
And second of all, that we wouldn't have been able to understand. Like, me now, from my viewpoint of a 36-year-old, I love working from home, like I get a lot of the benefits. Like looking at why a 22-year-old would want to come to the office, I may not have been able to understand that. So I think that empathy piece of actually meeting people and then talking to them is something that I truly always value. And it's always about telling the stories behind the data, because otherwise you can see the same data point and interpret it in so many different ways if you don't know what the real story is.
Absolutely. And I think one of the really unique pieces of collaborating with APCO on this is that we had an external perspective. We were looking from the outside in, so we could look at it without a bias. In our next video, you'll see Imad talk about why he himself, as a consultant, hired consultants to help them with this project. So over to you, Imad, to tell us more.
Imad, I have a tough question for you. You guys are consultants. You do change management. Why did you bring us in?
You know the saying, carpenter's door is always broken. I think the bias, we wanted to take out, because we're a bunch of consultants, so everyone has an opinion. So I think someone facilitating that and removing the biases as much as possible, and facilitating the internal discussion, not with the team members. Team members, it's great, but for the management team. And that was the toughest part of it, because each would have their view on it. We do it for our clients and we do it well, But for us, you will have this internal bias, personal preferences versus, I know it better, or so on and so forth. So having someone that's coming from the outside and outside eye, facilitating those discussions at all layers of the company, from management to everyone else, made our life much easier and the decision process much faster.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of respect for a consulting firm that would hire someone external to support them. I think it shows a lot of self-awareness. It is incredibly difficult when you have a lot of really smart people in the room with a lot of history together to isolate conversations, right? And to say, like, we're not allowed to talk about anything else. We're not allowed to bring in an example from a client or whatever. We're going to have to focus on this specific conversation. And I think our ability to bring data in and to also facilitate, I think they're both equally important. So if you inside your organization are managing this, you don't necessarily have to bring an external consultant, but you have to behave like one, I think is maybe the lesson we want to share here, in the sense that you have to be over prepared. You have to come with the data. You have to share it ahead of time. You have to let people digest it. And when you put leaders in the room, just think about like the money you're spending on that meeting. If it's a 2-hour workshop with the top leadership of an organization, just like think of how much you're spending on that meeting, and then really make the best of it. Really force people to have the conversations, force debate, even when people are being polite. You don't want them to be polite in that room, right? You want them to really engage and disagree with each other, because after they disagree, you also want them to commit. You want them to make a common decision and commit to its outcomes, even if originally they were not in agreement. And especially because you later want them to role model whatever behavior is necessary to enable that work. And so I think having those hard conversations, facilitating them, leading to an outcome, getting leaders to commit, is a huge part of this exercise, and one that I enjoy incredibly. I just love seeing the different personalities and opinions come and have dialogue and disagreement, and eventually come to a better decision together.
It's not easy to mediate when you have leaders in a room and everybody kind of comes in with their own sets of biases and the way that they think things should work. And one thing that stood out to me about how we worked on APCO was that each leader almost had a different part of the organization, and they represented a group of people with diverse needs. And so coming together and finding where you guys can have those similarities, where you can have that common ground, it was no easy feat. And I think I actually like what Imad said. The carpenter's door is always broken, and so, like you said, it really helps to bring that outside perspective. Maybe, Marilyn, you can show everybody what the outcomes of this were when we finally, had the data, brought people together, had some sort of a consensus. Walk us through what the outcomes were.
Yes, I mean, so the outcomes were that we, in terms of the space proportions, we definitely reshuffled the proportion of individual versus community versus public space. UPCO is a very important global organization in PR and comms and consulting. We also definitely wanted to bring out that brand and bring out the storytelling around the accomplishments of the organization, which we felt weren't very sufficiently represented in the office before. We wanted to bring pride and belonging. And then we also wanted, of course, to have different typologies of spaces to enable the various activities that were going to take place there. And we wanted to make sure that everybody was getting prime real estate. So what we ended up doing is reconverting that entrance space into a big public arena with the cafe, a boardroom that opens onto it and creates a massive space for town halls where even 100 individuals could fit, standing up or close together. We wanted to reconvert some of the spaces that are usually not leveraged sufficiently, like walkways or the pantry, which usually are transition spaces or short-lived spaces during the day, into spaces where teams could come together, where they could showcase their work, but also where they could create new work. We wanted to take those offices away from the facade and let them sit in the back and bring in the light. But also we wanted to create more intimate, working areas for everybody. So this was really kind of about multiplying the typologies of space. We'll see here that when it came to public space, we have, more of a cafe/lobby feel. We've integrated a gallery. We do still have a formal boardroom, but we also have more playful benchmarks in terms of how it integrates into the rest of the space. As far as the community spaces go, reconverting that pantry, reusing some of those rooms and making them more multi-purpose and more brainstorming focused, especially in an organization that thrives on creativity. And then in terms of individual or team level work, providing different typologies for people to be able to select the relevant space for their work. And so that was really where we went with that, really trying to also, again, learn from all the stories and the data and what the surveys told us around the kinds of spaces that everybody needed. And it was a really exciting result, and I can't wait for the team to move in. It should be happening next month. We're very, very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You also touched on with Imad what kind of happens beyond the design. So like you put this in place, you figured out what it could look like, you've given the brief to the architect, but what else? Because truly a floor plan is not enough. So we'd love to play the video of Imad telling us and you also sharing what happens beyond design.
Absolutely.
And I think, as I said earlier, the idea is beyond design. Imad, tell us about how you're integrating this into your ways of working. What's next for you? So we've done the office redesign, we've done the internal comms piece. How do you see this coming to life when you all move in?
Coming to life is how people will, interact with it. The multiple options that we saw is like the combined feedback of the team and some research and so on and so forth. And this is where people come in and they find their own spaces. Now, our work, I would say, practices or policies, HR, and so on and so forth, we were doing that, but we're going to accommodate it more to this. Use technology for people to better use that space. We're adding some stuff which you don't know about, by the way.
Oh, no.
Some things to keep people moving as well while sitting or while being in the office. So I think people will find their own way because we provided them, or we're hoping to provide, with lots of options so that they can customize and tailor that experience to them versus forcing, that team is here or that group does this or so on and so forth. I think they will find their own dynamics around how they want to use that space. It's big enough.
Absolutely. A lot of people actually ask Imad what happens beyond design. We had a few questions from the audience that are like, so what's next? What's the impact? Where do we go from here? What did you learn? We put together a few of these questions because we thought they might inspire audience members today to kind of, they might actually answer your questions, what you might be thinking, but also to share more. We'd love to kind of get a feel for what you guys are thinking about when it comes to rethinking the office. You can drop them in the comments, but for now, take a look at what some of the audience members asked. They had some good, tough questions and made us really leave us with a few things that we might want to come back and share with you once we've measured the outcomes of this project.
Whatever, can you share with us some of the results?
That's the hope.
Yeah, they haven't moved in yet.
We haven't moved in yet. The construction is still happening. So what we found is that the excitement through the process, because we did some internal comms as we were doing this, whether it be in the design process as well, we shared what we're doing, the kind of architecture is going to happen. So there were multiple touch points and town halls where we're talking about this. Now our hope is that hopefully in 6 months down the line, we can have that and we can have interaction around it. So the hope is there. We didn't move in yet.
But
should be in December.
And the good thing with APCO is that they actually run the Gallup engagement survey. They've ran it since before they met us. So we have a lot of historical data. And when they run it next year, we'll be able to see how things have evolved. But it's also a great question because the work is never done, right? And you'll see in a minute, we'll talk about beyond design, because you can design an office, but you don't teach people how to use it. You don't put in place the right processes, and actually it'll be counterproductive. And so it's really about, remember that omni-channel approach, it's really about saying that's just one thing. We like to use the metaphor of a network. If there are any telecom engineers in here, don't kill me, maybe I'm wrong. But I always say, like, you can't upgrade one antenna to 5G and have the network work. You got to do the whole system, right? And so that's actually also what APCO is working on now, which is making sure that this gets implemented into not just the design of the office, but the way that they work, their HR policies, and the internal comms piece. So we'll give you those results next year.
Frugal approach of this.
I love that. I'm all about iteration and being frugal. I think, here's what I would say to you. Take all the furniture out. You're not spending $1, just a day, probably. And then let people replace them where they want them.
Reimagine that.
Let them reimagine the space. Let them also use them for different purposes than you thought they were for. You'll see how the space evolves. Maybe you're going to need to buy one or two things, fine. But just go blank and see what people do with their own space and let them experiment and play with it. And let them talk to you, and I think facilitate a discussion about how the office is serving them and how it isn't. You know, do an office retrospective. Like, what's amazing about this office and what do we hate about it and what do we wish we had? And then let people invent their own solutions. Sometimes it's very small things that you can improve. I see Reem has a question.
If I may add to this one, yes, budget plays a role, as you said, and we can't hide that fact. But we looked at that office we're living in has been, I would say, done in 2013, right? And if you look at the time and the value of money since then, we paid much more money back then on the setup that we have right now versus what we're planning. And while we're doing this exercise right now, if we're going to compare it to the same kind of setup we had, it would have costed more. So we moved more from fixed things that we have to build into things that are much more scalable and practical. We moved into things that makes, what people are making use of versus things that are nice to have. So actually the cost that we're paying right now for whatever we're doing, even if it's like totally different from before, in comparison to previous exercise, is much cheaper. Because we did that to some extent. Reimagined the entire thing. Yes, we had the budget range, but we went on the lower spectrum of it.
This is my advice. I would love to ask you a few more questions, but off of what you just said. You're the leader. Nobody else is going to lead. Unless you think somebody on that team is going to be amazing at this job, but then you have to officially give them that role. Because otherwise, there's a bit of like the group dynamics that work. It's like, who's going to start? What are we going to do? And I don't know how to do this stuff, and it's really not my forte. And whether you lead or somebody else does, you need to give them a process. Because people, they're creative, and I know that you're in the creative industries, but not about this. So they don't know where to start. They don't know how to think about it. And that's why facilitation is important. You can be the one to facilitate, but you got to give a process. What is the path we're going to follow to redesign this? Are we going to take a half day off to do this? And I think also if you don't spend time on it, because of the size of your team, and so I know it's a small business or medium-sized business, they won't think it's important. They'll think it's just like Reem giving us stuff to do to like entertain us. But if you say, this is important, I will spend time on it, but I'd like someone else to lead. Here's who I've nominated. This is the process that they've designed for you, and I will take part in it. Now there's a signal that that's important. Because otherwise, they're busy dealing with all the fires and whatever clients' needs and whatever. It's hard for them to prioritize this. So I don't know if that will help, but I'm happy to talk more about it later.
So I think, as I said to Mido, the full experience will be next year. But the change that we started into breaking the silos, this started during COVID and after COVID. And this is why that space came in to complement that, or hoping to complement that. Because we went from having teams and agencies operate in ways that you have teams specialized certain industries, clients, and they become their own islands or silos, and they're very specialized in that, and people get stuck in that infrastructure that they're, and they spend maybe 2-3 years working on the same kind of clients, same kind of projects, where we turned this around and we just made it much more flat, and people are used based on the skill set that they have more than the team that they, in an HR format report into. So that kind of model already has been established as a working model between different teams and getting more experiences among other team members. So you can have an individual working on 3 different projects with 3 different theoretically teams because they're good in one thing and their skill is required. So that model has been implemented without having the space thing into perspective back in COVID days and after. And I think this will make them, those spaces will help them to be much more in that, do much more of that.
Yeah, I think it's a holistic approach, and you can't do the space without the process. You can't do the space without the middle management being on board. Like, it's not a silver bullet. You can't just redesign a space and expect people to know how to use it. Just the same way you can't buy a new software and be like, here you go. because you have to teach people how to optimize their ways of working using that tool. It's really a tool. So you have to be holistic in that approach.
Nobody has the magic answer. Like even in our homes, right? You would spend maybe, I don't know how much time with your wife, your partner, or with your kids to decide on a carpet, right? Individual opinions. So, of course, people coming into the office, you will have different opinions and different perspective about colors, about walls, about whatever it is. But as much as possible, we try to have them part of the process to minimize, just the forcing part of it. And let's see.
Yeah, great questions from the audience there. A few really, really good nuggets. I have to say, we actually have a couple of questions from our own audience here, Tala. Maybe you want to answer them. Let's see. Maya's asking, if the leader starts off designing the office in the wrong way, didn't get flexibility right, is there any way they can make up for it, or is the process only fully holistic? A great question and a tough one, right? Because in an ideal world, then you really have the ability to do the entire process the way we did. In a less than ideal world, you can still iterate. It's kind of what I answered Rami, who was asking this question about, startups and not having a budget, which is that you can iterate. You can take, for example, one room at a time. I remember in a company I used to work, this is when I lived in France, we only had one microwave. We were a team of maybe 12 people. Like, you wouldn't think that 12 people need more than a microwave. But because in France, we had a big habit as a team to bring food to the office as opposed to always going out. It meant that actually, and usually frozen, because it's France, whatever, there's a beautiful brand there called Picard that makes the most amazing frozen food. And so there was a period in our lives where we all decided that's what we were going to do. And I remember sitting down with one of the R&D heads and actually doing the math for how many microwaves we needed so that we could all enjoy lunch together. Because the consequence is everybody needed 3 minutes to heat their food. And then that meant that maybe we would never all be sitting together. And the answer was 3. And so I so happened to have 2 microwaves at home, one that I wasn't using. So I brought it in, right? And it's really silly and it's not all that important. And it wasn't a big investment. It was actually just lying around doing nothing. Or even if we had purchased one, it would have been like $100 maybe. But it changed the dynamics and allowed us to spend time together. So I think even if you aren't able to do a fully holistic thing, looking one room at a time or one activity at a time and seeing how you can enable it is another way of approaching this. Just baby steps right there.
Yeah.
Tala, I'll ask you the next question. What do you think is the most important thing about flexible office design?
I saw that question, and I think I'm actually going to say the most important thing about flexible office design is designing your work and your flexible work first. I wouldn't start with the office. I would make sure you have your work model in place. I would make sure everybody's aware of, how you come together, how do you convene, how do you collaborate, how do you communicate, what is your work model, simply put, and then based off of that, what you need the space for and design in that sense. Because if you start with a layout, you're going to make a lot of assumptions and you're not going to get it right. Then you're going to have to go do what Maya asked about, which is go back and start again. So I definitely say start with the work model design, then ask your people, talk to them. Like we heard from Imad and you, be people-centric, ask them questions. Put a quick survey on Google Forms and send it out, and then start thinking about what you need the space for and designing it. So that really, for me, comes like fourth in the process step. But what would you agree? Would you disagree? What would you say is the most important thing?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think maybe just to add, because you took all the good answers, but I must add something. I think it's also about leadership, engagement and middle management engagement. So once you're done with the design piece, let's say in terms of the implementation piece, I think it's about incredible internal comms. I think it's about upskilling people. I think it's also about making sure that everybody in your middle management is saying the exact same thing, even if you have to spoon feed them the message, and is also behaving in ways that reinforce the message. Flexibility is something that everybody needs to understand. They need to enable it. They need to empower people to be flexible. It is not just about what time you start or where you work from. It's also like a mindset of flexibility and agility that needs to be ingrained. So don't underestimate upskilling and, re-mindsetting piece, if that was a word. And so with that, Tala, we have come to the end of this session. Again, I could talk about office design forever, but that's it for today. I want to thank Imad, and also just a special note to Philip as well. Philip was one of our partners on this. Incredible working with him. He couldn't join us for the event, but he was with us every step of the way and was an incredible partner to work with. And everybody at the UPCO team also for including us and collaborating with us as if we were part of the team. It was such a beautiful experience, and trusting us really to design the future of their workforce together with them. So thanks to Imad also for joining us and for being part of the 2022 Cosmic Conference. I'm sure you'll be seeing him again, perhaps on center stage later this year. And of course, a big thank you, as always, to our attendees for tuning in. Thank you, Tala, for joining me.
For having me.
Show. As always, the video is available on LinkedIn to be rewatched anytime, and in a few hours will be available on our YouTube and website. We're constantly updating our website, publishing the videos, but also publishing other types of content, including later today we'll publish an article that's a bit of a think piece around the UPCO case study and a few lessons that we've learned. You can find that on our conference website. So do follow us there and follow our LinkedIn pages. And later on today, I think, I want to say in about an hour or so. Wait, I have to get this right. Is it at 5:30?
Yeah, it's at 5:30.
UAE time? Yeah, I think it's 5:30 UAE time. We'll be joined
45
by...
minutes.
There you go. 45 minutes from now, we will be joined by Laurel, who will be talking to us about how to design truly great flexible work experiences. So do join us. She is one of the eminent experts in flexible and remote work, has been doing this for a decade, has a lot of wisdom and examples to share with us. So join us in 45 minutes. We look forward to that conversation. And with that, we come to the end of this episode of the Cosmic Conference. Tala, thanks again for joining me, and everybody, see you in a little bit.